You ever walk away from a conversation feeling drained, like somehow someone reached in and just stole your peace? You're not crazy. That's what toxic people do. But what if I told you that there's one mindset shift, just one, that flips the script? You don't have to argue. You don't have to prove anything. And no, you don't have to cut everyone off. Do this once and watch how the people who feed on your reactions just stop showing up. You ever notice how some people only really engage with you when you're defending yourself? When you're on your heels, trying to clarify, explain, make sense of something that didn't even come from you in the first place, they throw a comment out there, maybe passive aggressive, maybe just outright disrespectful, and then wait for you to jump. And if you do, they win, because toxic people don't want clarity. They want control. And the more you try to explain yourself to someone who's not interested in understanding you, the more ground you're giving up. Now, I want to make something clear. Explaining yourself isn't a bad thing. Communication is good. But there's a difference between healthy communication and emotional defense mechanisms. Toxic people blur that line. They create situations where you feel like you owe them something, an answer, a justification, maybe even an apology, when really all they did was make you question your reality. And so you go into overdrive, trying to walk them through your every move. You replay conversations. You send paragraphs. You talk to 3 friends just to make sure you're not overreacting. But here's the truth. When someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of explanation is going to change that. What if instead of playing defense, you just stopped explaining yourself? I'm talking about pausing before you rush to justify, taking a breath before you feel the need to fill the silence, choosing not to perform emotional gymnastics for someone who wouldn't do half as much for you. That shift, it's small, but it's everything. Because here's what happens when you stop explaining. They lose control. They don't know how to proceed when you're not giving them something to twist. When you say, I'm not comfortable with that, and then you stop talking, you're forcing them to deal with a version of you that isn't bending over backwards. That silence, that calm, quiet pause, that's where your power lives. It's where your peace takes root. And look, I get it. We explain ourselves because we want to be understood. We want to be seen as fair, rational kind. That's human. But the moment you realize that your peace is more important than someone else's opinion of your intentions, everything changes. You start recognizing that some people don't want peace with you. They want access to you. And there's a big difference. Let's say someone accuses you of being selfish because you set a boundary. The instinct might be to say, no, I'm not selfish. I just have a lot going on. I didn't mean to ignore you. It's just that. And now you're explaining. But what if you just said, I understand you feel that way, and left it there? You're not being rude. You're not being dismissive. You're just not inviting yourself into a debate you never agreed to have. That moment right there, that's the one I want you to remember, because toxic people don't know what to do when you don't feed the fire. They're used to the cycle, provoke, explain, twist, repeat. But when you cut out the second step, the whole thing collapses. And yes, they might call you cold. They might say you've changed. And you've changed into someone who's not willing to sacrifice their inner calm just to appease someone else's chaos. Here's the part that gets real quiet. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will leave. And that's a good thing, because if your presence was dependent on your constant justification, it was never a relationship. It was a performance, and you're not performing anymore. You are allowed to say no without a 5-step explanation. You are allowed to make decisions that protect your peace without opening them up for debate. You are allowed to walk away from conversations that are going nowhere. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be meaner. You just need to be done. One of the hardest lessons to learn, especially for those of us who care deeply, who want to keep the peace, who are taught to be nice, is this: you don't owe anyone a full backstory every time you say no. Let that settle for a second. You don't owe them a breakdown, a history, a family tree of reasons just so your boundary feels valid. The boundary F is the reason. Now, I get it. We've been conditioned to cushion our boundaries so they land softly, especially with people who might not like hearing them. So instead of just saying, I'm not available, we'll say something like, I'm so sorry. It's just that this week's been crazy and I've had no sleep. and my cousin's in town. And what we're really saying is, please still like me after this? No. But that's the trap. Toxic people love that space you leave open, the space where you're trying to prove you're not a bad person for protecting yourself. They crawl right into that gap and start unpacking your words, twisting them, making you second guess what should have been a simple decision. And the next thing, you're backpedaling, adjusting, bending your boundary just enough so it doesn't feel too sharp for them. But boundaries aren't meant to be soft. They're meant to be clear. When you set a boundary without a backstory, you're saying something powerful. I trust myself. I know what I need, and I'm not building a case to make it palatable. That level of confidence, it unsettles toxic people because it means their usual tactics, guilt, manipulation, emotional pressure, they don't stick the same way anymore. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone keeps calling you late at night, even after you've said you're not available during those hours. Instead of explaining your sleep schedule or making it about being so busy, what if you just said, I don't take calls that late, period. That's not rude. That's responsible. That's clarity. And what comes next, whether they guilt trip you, accuse you of changing, or try to push past the boundary, that's not your burden to carry. Your job isn't to make your no feel like a yes in disguise. Your job is to protect your peace. I see this all the time with people who are slowly learning to advocate for themselves. They'll say something like, I just didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I'll say, but you're hurting yours in the process. Every time you over-explain a boundary, you're trying to manage their emotions at the cost of your own. And you end up exhausted. You start resenting people, not just for crossing the line, but for making you feel like you had to draw it with glitter and soft pillows. But once you get the hang of this, once you realize you can just say no or not now, or I'm not okay with that, and leave it there, something shifts. You stop attracting people who only respect boundaries that come with disclaimers. And you start building relationships with people who don't need a reason to respect your limits. They just do because they respect you. Now, I want to be honest, it won't always go over smoothly. Some people will push back. Some will call you difficult, selfish, even dramatic. That's okay. Let them. Their discomfort with your boundary is not your cue to soften it. It's their cue to adjust or exit. And either outcome is a win for your peace. This isn't about being cold. It's about being clear. It's about realizing you are not a customer service rep for your own life. You don't have to give out tracking numbers every time you change direction. You don't need to sell people on your self-worth. You just need to honor it. So from now on, say what you mean. Say it kindly, say it calmly, but say it without the extra paragraphs. Your boundary is valid even when it's simple. Toxic people thrive on reaction. That's their fuel. They poke, they prod, they trigger. Because what they really want is your emotional energy. They want the spark in your eyes, the shift in your voice, the quick rise in your chest. And once they get it, they know they've got you. They know you're playing the game. But here's something they can't work with: neutrality, calm, stillness. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do when dealing with a toxic person is to become boring on purpose. No drama, no pushback, no reaction, just flat. That's what the gray rock method is all about. When you show up like a gray rock, emotionally neutral, unmoved, they can't latch onto anything. There's no emotional hook to grab. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about being fake. It's not about suppressing your feelings. It's about being intentional with your energy, because not everyone deserves access to your reactions. Just like you wouldn't hand your house keys to a stranger, you don't need to hand your emotional response to someone who's proven they don't handle it with care. Think about the last time someone tried to bait you. Maybe it was a passive, aggressive comment at a family dinner. Maybe it was a coworker throwing shade in a meeting. Maybe it was a partner or an ex trying to twist your words into something they never were. Your instinct might have been to correct them, to defend yourself, to set the record straight. That's human. But here's the thing: when you engage, you're entering their arena. And once you're in it, they get to set the rules. But what if you didn't give them that? What if you just nodded and said, "Him," or changed the subject, or answered with a simple, "Okay," and moved on? What if you gave them absolutely nothing to feed off of? They won't know what to do with that. You're taking away the very thing they count on, your reaction. The gray rock method isn't about winning an argument. It's about refusing to enter one. It's about letting your peace become so unshakable that their chaos can't find a crack to crawl through. When they get silence instead of spark, they get confused. When they get calm instead of conflict, they get uncomfortable. And eventually they get bored. Because here's the secret: toxic people don't actually want connection. They want control. And once they realize you're not available for that game anymore, they tend to move on to someone who is. That's not rejection. That's protection. That's protection. That's your energy doing its job. Now I know some people worry that this approach feels passive, that it means letting bad behavior slide. But let me tell you, there is nothing passive about self-control. There is strength in choosing stillness when someone is begging you to break. There is power in staying quiet when every part of you wants to react. You're not avoiding the issue. You're reclaiming your power by not letting someone else dictate your emotional temperature. You're drawing a line, not with volume, but with presence. And yes, they might accuse you of being distant, of not caring, of changing. Let them. You're not here to prove you're still the same person who used to overextend, over-explain, and overreact. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to stop showing up for battles that leave you empty. At first, this shift will feel unfamiliar. You'll feel the urge to jump in, to defend yourself, to be understood. But the more you practice, the more you'll realize something beautiful. Not reacting isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's knowing that you don't have to participate in every storm that passes through your life. You get to be the calm. You get to be the stillness. You get to be the rock. There's a moment that catches people off guard when they start setting boundaries, when they start speaking up, standing firm, showing up differently. It's the silence that follows, the unanswered texts, the sudden distance, the change in tone. Someone you used to hear from all the time suddenly goes quiet after you finally said something honest. And the temptation is to panic, to think, did I go too far? Was I too harsh? Did I mess this up? But let me tell you something real simple. Their silence is their answer. That moment of quiet after you finally speak your truth, that's not rejection. It's revelation. It shows you exactly where they stood the entire time. Because healthy people, real, grounded, emotionally safe people, don't run away when you set a boundary. They lean in, they adjust, they respect it. It's only the ones who benefited from your silence, your over-jeeving, your constant yes, who get uncomfortable when you finally say no. Toxic people don't always leave in a storm. Sometimes they leave in a shrug, a slow fade, a quiet withdrawal. And because it's not loud or dramatic, we start filling in the blanks ourselves. We start justifying. We think maybe they're just busy. Maybe they didn't understand what I meant. Maybe I should reach out again just to smooth things over. But what you're really doing is chasing clarity from someone who's already given it to you in the form of distance. We don't like silence because it feels unfinished. But with some people, silence is the most honest response you'll ever get. When they stop showing up after you speak up, that's clarity. When they disappear after you ask for respect, that's confirmation. And it hurts, yes, but it also saves you because it spares you the performance. It spares you from investing in people who only ever saw you as valuable when you were easy to manage. When someone falls back the moment you draw a line, that's not someone who loved you unconditionally. That's someone who loved the version of you who didn't have boundaries. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But once you do, you start realizing the silence wasn't the loss. It was the reveal. We've been taught to chase closure, to fix what feels broken, to not let people slip away. But here's the truth. No one tells you. Not everyone deserves an exit interview. Not everyone deserves to be convinced to stay. If someone disappears the moment you start showing up differently, let them. Their absence is not a failure on your part. It's an invitation to make room for people who see the full you and stay. You want to know if your boundary is strong. Watch who disappears. That's not drama. That's data. That's life showing you what relationships were conditional, what dynamics were one-sided, and what patterns no longer work now that you've grown. And I want you to hear this clearly. Your healing will make some people uncomfortable. Your peace will feel like distance to those who only knew you in your chaos. But don't shrink just to fill the silence. Don't run back just to fill the space. If someone can't sit with the version of you that finally honors yourself, let them exit. That silence isn't a door closing on you. It's a door opening for you. You don't have to beg people to respect you. You don't have to overextend to keep someone in your life. If someone pulls back because you finally decided to take care of yourself, let them stay gone. Because the people who are meant for your next chapter won't get scared off by your growth. You deserve relationships that don't require you to shrink, to explain, to chase, or to perform. You deserve people who stay even when you get honest. There comes a moment when you realize that not every voice that reaches you deserves a response. And when that moment hits, everything shifts. Your peace stops being so easily hijacked. Your day stops being dictated by someone else's mood, tone, or opinion. Because the truth is, so many of us are trained to respond by default. To every text, every call, every rude comment, every emotional push. We think being a good person means being constantly available, always engaging, always explaining. But the reality is the most grounded version of you doesn't respond to everything. It chooses what's worth your energy and lets the rest fall flat. Toxic people thrive on your availability. They count on your need to explain, defend, smooth things over. But when you stop giving automatic access to your attention, they get confused. They start realizing they're not as close to the control panel of your life as they thought. And that's the beginning of real freedom. You have to start seeing your attention like a currency. Valuable, limited, not for everyone. When someone shows up with drama, manipulation, or guilt, and you don't answer, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity, you're sending a powerful message. My peace isn't up for grabs. We often feel pressure to respond because silence feels rude. It feels unfinished. It feels like maybe we're being cold or passive aggressive. But silence isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's alignment. Sometimes it's the clearest way to say, this doesn't deserve a place in my life. And here's the thing, when you respond to everything, you become reactive. You're constantly pulled out of alignment, trying to manage everyone else's emotions while yours get pushed further and further down the list. But when you start choosing your responses, not out of fear or guilt, but from a place of grounded self-respect, you stop being tossed around by every opinion, every mood, every conflict that comes your way. Let's say someone sends a nasty message. In the past, maybe you would have typed out a long reply, point by point, defending yourself, justifying your actions, making sure they knew you weren't what they accused you of. But what did that ever get you? Maybe a temporary sense of control, but probably not peace. Toxic people don't want truth. They want engagement. They want you in the mud with them, trying to fix something they never intended to fix in the first place. Now imagine seeing that same message and choosing not to respond at all. Not out of pettiness, but because you've outgrown the need to prove yourself. That's a different kind of power. That's emotional maturity. That's knowing that your voice isn't meant to echo in places where it will only be misunderstood. You're not required to keep every door open. You're allowed to protect your time, your space, your energy. And no one has the right to demand a piece of you just because they've always had access in the past. Growth means reevaluating who and what you respond to. That might mean not responding to a guilt trip from a family member, not entertaining passive, aggressive comments from a coworker, not explaining your boundaries to someone who's only trying to test them. It might mean letting a call go to voicemail and being okay with that. It might mean letting a text sit unread and not losing sleep over it. That's not emotional detachment. It's emotional direction. It's knowing that every response costs something and you're done paying for peace with your time, your energy, or your sanity. And sure, some people won't like it. They'll call you distant, cold, even selfish. But those are the voices that benefited from your constant yes. Let them adjust or let them go. Either way, you'll be just fine. You don't owe your presence where your peace isn't protected. So here's what it all comes down to. Toxic people lose their grip the moment you stop handing them the script. When you stop explaining yourself just to be understood, when you set boundaries without a backstory, when you show up neutral instead of reactive, when you let their silence speak louder than their words, and when you stop responding just because someone demanded your attention, that's when everything shifts. Not with a fight, not with a big scene, but with quiet decisions made one moment at a time. You don't have to become someone else to protect yourself. You just have to become someone who's finally done performing for people who never clapped anyway. Do this once, and they won't bother you again.